Inside the halls of San Diego State University lies a program dedicated to storytelling and pursuing the truth. Welcome to Where You At, a podcast that takes you inside the work of alumni for the School of Journalism and Media Studies at San Diego State. Our goal is to show the success of our alumni, inspire students with the stories, and connect students and alums on a pathway to journalism success. And now, here's your host, Josh Sushan.
This week on the Where You At podcast, we're heading out to Miami, Florida. We're going to discuss journalism, print journalism, investigative journalism. Our guest this week is Ana Ceballos. She is a state government reporter at the Miami Herald. She focuses on education, immigration, and criminal justice, which means she is very busy. There is a lot of news, and a lot of times that local news becomes national news. Ana, thank you so much for being a part of the Where You At podcast, and welcome.
Thank you. So happy to be here.
Well, we're excited to talk to you about a fascinating time in American politics and the stories that you are writing. We will get to everything happening at the Miami Herald later, but we always like to start by asking people just where it all began, right? It's like how it started, how it ended, and how it was in between. And one of my favorite questions to ask people, and I'm going to ask you, Ana, is when did you think you wanted to be a journalist, and when did you know that you wanted to be a journalist?
So my dad always jokes that ever since I was a little girl, I wanted to be a writer. So I would write little not fake, but children's books, about a little caterpillar and just do drawings. And I just loved writing. My favorite classes were always English. So, and I loved reading. And so I always knew I wanted to do something related to the creative writing process. I always, literally when I was a toddler, I would say that I wanted to be an author. And I was of course, that's a very ambitious thing for a toddler to want to be. But really, when I became interested in journalism was when I was a little bit older, obviously, a little bit, I was a teen, and I was, as a lot of the students at SDSU know, Tijuana is right across the border, just a 20-minute drive or so. And so I grew up in Tijuana until I was 16. And it was around a time where there was a lot of violence in the city. There were record homicides. It was around, 2006 and 2008 or so, where my family, I was born in the US, so my family decided to pretty much rent me and my brother, who was also a US citizen, an apartment. And so we would live alone and go to school in San Diego to just pretty much get us out of the violence in the city. So it was a pretty big shock to the system. And I just remember wanting to consume as much news as I could at that time. And I remember just wanting to know more and more, and was so curious about the situation that my hometown was going through. And I wanted to be part of the information industry, if you will, right, of helping people understand what was going on, because, and sometimes you hear a lot of things when you're in a difficult situation, and it's always word of mouth, and you don't really know what to trust. And sometimes they were very hyperbolic stories, and sometimes they are true in Mexico, right? I mean, there was a point where I remember reading the front page of the newspaper in Tijuana, and there were, people bodies, right, on the street were that I took to go to elementary school, or messages that were very graphic from cartel members. And so it was just a very crude awakening, I guess, to reality at a really young age. And because I already knew that I wanted to do something with writing, I was well, what about journalism, right? I mean, it seems like it's a way that it's meaningful. It's a career that can help, a career that can inform, a career that can sometimes bring people ease, even if it was like bad news, like knowing and being informed gives you some sort of control to your reality. And I just fell in love with that. So it was really around, I would say maybe my sophomore year in high school that I just knew that I would want to just study journalism.
So you said something in there that I need to follow up on. You and your brother were rented an apartment in San Diego and you guys lived together. Did you guys like do all the cooking and cleaning? Give us more details about the process of you and your brother becoming roommates in the United States so that you could go to high school.
Right? It was a chaotic time in terms of, it was an emotionally chaotic time because it was, we had the ability, I guess, we had the resources to be able to have a comfortable life in that way, but it was not normal, right? I mean, I want to say, how old was I? I was like 15. My brother was 18 or so, or a little bit younger. We are about 3 years apart. And, it's like, you're a teenager. You're not like, I don't know. You think you think you're an adult, but you're really not. And because it was like an easy commute. My mom would come see us like every day and just go back home. And so we had a normal life in that way where like, we would come home from school and like my mom would be there with like food. And then, my brother and I would just kind of be like, at home, like alone, not so much alone, like, but it was mostly like at night, where she would go back and meet my dad. It was, again, not normal. It was not a party. It was just kind of, and I think a lot of kids relate to this who live in both cities. And I think there's a lot of people in San Diego County that deal with that. You don't feel like you belong in the US. You don't feel like you belong in Mexico. You feel like you have like dual realities going on at the same time. And it was just like a very intense moment for me for finding my identity, finding what I like, some center into what I wanted to do. And I really did find journalism to be kind of a comfort. And the writing process, obviously, it's so therapeutic. So it was a really a time where there were a lot of changes and it was different, I guess.
Yeah, as you're saying that, I'm thinking about what it'd be like if my sister and I had our own apartment, but it also made me think about, as someone whose parents were divorced and got shuttled back and forth, there was lots of times that I did kind of end up being alone and I did a lot of writing, and I'm wondering if that might have been a similar process for me as well. But let me ask you this. I feel like my perspective on San Diego State as someone who grew up in the Bay Area is probably different than yours, even though you're much closer to San Diego State, literally. But basically, but what you said about not really feeling like you completely belong either place, what was just what drew you to San Diego State? What was like your feeling about this university up on the Mesa and made you want to go to school there?
Well, it's funny because I actually was considering San Francisco State University for a little while, and I got accepted, but obviously finance, and I got a scholarship. I remember, and I was telling my parents, like, come on, like, you don't have to pay for tuition. And it's like, well, housing is very expensive over there. So it was, in a way, it was a financial thing, but then there was a moment in time where I also got accepted into other universities, one in Santa Barbara, that I really was dying to go to because it had a great photojournalism program that I ended up, using photography more as a hobby than an actual career path. And San Diego State, I had a good program, and I just, it was the convenience that I could also stay close to home, and I would not have student loans, which is, in hindsight, it's amazing that I just graduated without really any student debt, which I know it's a big burden for a lot of students in the country. So I think it was just like doing my pros and cons. Like, do I want to graduate with debt or not? Do I want to stay close to home or not? Can we afford this? Right. And for me to go somewhere else. And it ended up being, I learned more about the program and I was like, it's a really good program. And they have one of the things that also drew me was the student newspaper. I was like, maybe I can get some experience there. And it just felt like also San Diego had a lot of opportunities and this is something I learned more once on my first year at SDSU, where there were more opportunities for internships, for example, because there were a lot of little outlets. And because I was interested in journalism, still with a focus on what was going on in my hometown, I was like, well, I can maybe do some reporting on the border. So it was all just a variety of reasons, but affordability was definitely one. And two was the program looked good and the location was really convenient for the type of journalism I wanted to do.
So you mentioned the Daily Aztec and you're on campus now. Do you dive right into student journalism, the Daily Aztec classes? Do you kind of spend a year just kind of getting your feet wet and just taking your classes and not doing other things? Or when did you really start focusing on, getting actual journalism practical help?
Oh, it was first semester. I knew what I wanted to do. I was actually kind of upset. I remember that I had to take undergrad classes. I was like, no, I already know what I want to do. Why do I have to take, biology of sex? I think that was one of my classes. And it was really interesting learning how, some insects reproduce, but I don't know. I was just like, I already know what I want to do. And I remember I joined some clubs. And then I started doing more research. I was very intimidated at first to even knock on the door of a Daily Aztec. I was like, oh my gosh, these are the senior students and they're gonna, it's I don't know. I just thought it was the most prestigious thing. Right. And I was like, I felt like I needed to at least get a semester in me to be able to be worthy to knock on that door in the basement of the I don't even know what the building was, but it was just a very obscure building. And I remember meeting some people in a class, I believe, or a club, and they said, just come over and we'll do a test, pretty much, submit something you want to write about, and I'll read it and I'll let you know how it is. And I remember her name was Sarah Kobosh, and she was the editor at the time, the news editor at the time, or assistant news editor for the paper. And she was so sweet and so encouraging. And she was my first edit. And it was so embarrassing because I pretty much submitted an essay because I was only used to really writing essays for book reports and stuff like that. So I wrote a news story in pretty much a scholarly format. And she's like, no, this is not a news story. And so she kind of gave me my first tips and I was like, oh, I see. And it was the Daily Aztec was really my first journalism class at SDSU. It was before I could even, start qualifying for the journalism school.
Yeah, a lot of similarities in your story, which I can appreciate. The same thing for me. It's peeking in through the window. So when I was a student, it was in the PSFA building, so it wasn't in the basement. And so just kind of peeking in. Wait, is that someone who I know? And I remember when I turned in the first article, and Eric Winter was the sports editor, and he said, "Okay, so we made some changes." We talked on the phone. He said, "So we made some changes." I was like, oh boy. He's like, so compare and contrast what you turned into what it ends up in print. And I remember looking at the two different pages going okay, so that's how a paragraph works. Or that's how a sentence works.
Exactly.
And we definitely don't use semicolons at the Daily Aztec. And
what's the lead?
Yeah. But it was extremely helpful. And I feel the student journalists who were just 1 and 2 years older than me were sort of my first professors. And a lot of them, in fact, an extremely high number of them are still my friends to this day. And I'm just wondering, about the evolution for you in terms of this student is helping me, and then a year or two later, I'm doing the exact same thing to another student who's now, the next Ana who's a freshman and intimidated.
Yeah, I mean, I did end up being first an assistant news editor and then the managing editor at the paper, which is crazy to me. I was just so intimidated. And all of a sudden, here I am, like actually, doing what Sarah did for me. And it just took a lot of stumbles and a lot of work and a lot of practice. I always thought I was a good writer, and it was intimidating to know that I wasn't I started thinking, I'm not a good journalist, right? I'm a good writer in a different way because I get A's in English, but like, why can't I write what happened at the city council meeting
Right.
and make it make sense, right? It was just, a lot of practice. And I remember the most I learned was under Sarah, because I just did not know what I was doing. And I just started writing a lot. And that's how I got better. And, it was before I could even, I even forget what, I remember even writing off of press releases, right? Just, you get a press release from the university and I was like, oh, write this up and just do a little brief. And so it was just writing and rewriting press releases in a newsy way. And it just went from there. And now I think I'm very patient because I was always so appreciative that she was so patient with me. And I don't know, it was just such an important part of why I am the writer that I am today, just the Daily-astic in general, because then you meet others, right? You meet other news reporters. We were a little team of, what was it, 20 volunteer writers who had no idea what they were doing at first. And so we kind of all learned from each other and we just kind of bonded over that. And we were so excited, and it was so exciting to see your name in print for the first time walking around Campanile Way. And all of a sudden I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm on the front page writing about fish tacos at the cafeteria, right? And it was just so exciting. And I remember, because I had friends in other careers and just having them send me pictures of the paper, like, you're on the front page. Oh my gosh. It was almost like you were a little celebrity. And then I also remember, I don't know if it's still there, but the Koala, is it still there? The newspaper, the alternative newspaper.
Oh, I'm not living in San Diego to know if the Koala is there, but I need to find out now.
So they were rivals, we were student run and independent, but we were kind of like the newsy, more cookie cutter type of, obviously, newspaper formats. And they were more of gossip and what's going on in school. And there was always this kind of rivalry. And it was almost do you want to be a Koala writer? Do you want to be a Daily-astic writer? It's well, no, I want to be a Daily-astic writer. But the Koala kids were the cool kids, but they were so, it was a lot of dirty jokes and kind of crude humor. So it was a fun time of discovery.
Is there a particular story that you look back on that, especially if it was an investigative story or even just a really hard news story that you did as a student journalist that you can look back on and you can say that really helped prepare me, really gave me an insight into what it means to be a journalist who's writing about something other than fish tacos, which is a very important topic, but still was something that kind of helped set the stage for what you do now?
Yeah, I think it was when I started paying, I don't know if it's a particular story, but I remember the experience of covering the governance boards of the university and when student fees were being hiked and when there was, resolutions on the agenda or when there was some shenanigans that they used, that the oh my gosh, Board of Trustees was doing. I remember there was it was a press release and I won an award for it. And I still think it's hilarious because maybe it was really great writing but I just rewrote a press release that it was an announcement about how some Board of Trustees had been punished pretty much for using state funds for their own perks and remodeling their houses and all this stuff. And I just remember being made aware of like improprieties and like how our university could be run. And I was just like, oh my gosh, if this is happening here, what's happening somewhere else, right? But I always remember like talking, like the student fee stories were always like the most interesting ones because everyone could relate to that. And then you could just go around campus and just every single person was someone to interview because everyone was affected.
All right, one more question about San Diego State, and then we're going to talk about Miami. You were a winner of the Roy W. Howard competition, and that led to a trip to Japan. I am jealous that I never knew this thing existed. Tell me about this competition and what you won and going to Japan.
I know, right? When I learned about it, I was just like, me? I'm going to Japan? And they just said, yeah, you just need a passport. It's like, I have a passport. And so it was an essay that I had to write about why I got into journalism. And it was a really small group. It was like a national competition. And it was out of the University of Indiana, I believe. And it was a group of about 10, and then we all went to Japan for 10 days. And it was so great because we had a journalism professor who was our tour guide pretty much, and he knew some Japanese, and we also had some translators. So we didn't really have to do much. We were just in it for the ride, and we went to a few cities, and we went to talk to some journalists from the Associated Press in their newsroom. We talked to some foreign correspondents and how it was like to cover, Japanese news or Japan news as a foreigner. And also we went to Hiroshima, we went to the museum just to learn more about nuclear weapons and the treaties and all these things. And it was just like it was like a nice trip overall, but it was so informative too. And I think that also made me want to do more of like the international type of reporting that I always knew I was interested in with like the border politics. And when I was younger, I was like, National Geographic is the place for me. I want to just go into the Amazon and interview these, tribes. That was like my dream at first, but obviously it's easier said than done to start doing that. And so it was just like a really fun opportunity. And I remember after that, I was just like immediately at the Daily-astic, I was like, when the deadline was coming up, everyone apply, like, everyone has to go. It was just, making everyone aware of opportunities was always like a thing that I love to do.
Yeah, I think one of the themes of this podcast is read the emails that have these types of opportunities and look at all of the flyers that are up on bulletin boards, because whether it's you going to Japan or whether it's we've heard stories about people going to the Kentucky Derby as part of some type of internship. We've heard a lot of stories about students who get an internship to go to New York City for the summer and work for magazines. This was a number of years ago. I don't know if it still exists, but just how much those things impact their just worldview and their desire to the contacts that they make and the things that they learn. And so let's go from that to, it looked like from your LinkedIn that you moved to Florida pretty quickly after San Diego State, especially as someone who grows up on the border, Tijuana, San Diego. Give us the story of how you ended up in Florida somewhat quickly after graduation.
Yeah, I mean, it was not planned, obviously. It was, well, not obviously, but as soon as I graduated, I got a job in Monterey, California, and I was there for about, I want to say 2 years. And I worked for the daily newspaper and the weekly newspaper, and I loved it. It was really great. But then after I worked for both papers, I was like, well, what else is there to do, right? I don't want to just cover city government forever. So when Donald Trump got elected, I kind of took a leap, and because he had made immigration such a crucial part of his campaign, I was like, I'm just going to move back home and see what's going on at the border. So I started freelancing and took really a risk because I had a pretty good steady job, but I just wanted to do more. And I started reporting on like there was a lot of Haitians who were in Tijuana just trying to cross after the earthquake. And there were a lot of issues with the shelters in Tijuana. And I ended up freelancing as a stringer, which is just pretty much contributing to the main reporter of the Washington Post, who was doing a story about the drug issue at the border and what was going on with trafficking at that time. And I remember going to shelters who had like addicts in Tijuana and just interviewing them. Some of them were like wrapped up in drug trafficking. And so it was just feeding the story. I didn't have like a byline, but I had like a contributing line at the bottom. But it was just like, I think I've always, even though I always wanted to be a writer, I think now I am a better reporter than I am a writer, because I am just so curious about all that. So anyway, long story short, I was freelancing at the border. And then when I was there, one of my former mentors at an internship said, "Hey, are you doing anything right now?" And I'm like, "Well, I'm kind of freelancing. I don't really have like a full-time job." And he's like, "Well, someone reached out to me from the Associated Press and they're looking for, it's called like a legislative relief reporter. So the legislative sessions here in Florida are 2 months, about 60 days. And they just needed someone to help out the 3-person bureau at the time, just to lend an extra hand because it's so busy." I was told it'll just be 2 months, and it was paid really well. And I was like, I could use some experience with covering state government. Absolutely. So I came, and then my 2 months ended, and I was, in love with pretty much what I was covering. And it was just so interesting. And Florida was so different from how California was being run, what I've always known about how government was run, right? This is a swing state. There's the Republicans are in control. There's Democrats, and it's considered a purple state, but Democrats really don't have that much power. So they were proposing all these immigration hardline policies. And so I just kind of loved it. And then I just ended up staying.
Famous last words. It'll only be 2 months. No, it'll only be 2 months.
And initially I was supposed to go to Louisiana, but it didn't work out because the session started at a time where I was not going to be able to make it. So it was just, they're like, "Oh, well, then they have something in Florida." It's like, okay, well, I'll go to Florida.
Before we talk more about your time with the Miami Herald now, I'm glad that I'm such a newspaper lover. I delivered newspapers when I was a kid. I worked at the Daily Aztec, my first jobs initially before I left the newspaper business, but I still have this very warm spot in my heart for newspapers. And I know that they are struggling these days. They're not dying, they're struggling. And I'm just kind of wanted to get your opinion on just the newspaper industry and what it means to you to still work for a newspaper. Obviously, there's still the digital component of the Miami Herald, and just, where newspapers are and and the pride that you feel in working for one.
So I'm based in Tallahassee, where the state capital is. And obviously the newspaper that I work for is based in Miami. And I don't get the print copy. But when I go to Miami, just holding the physical paper, right? There's this emotional attachment. There's this nostalgia. And I still get newspapers at home. There's a different feel when you read news. When you take the time, put your phones down, and you're just focused on reading rather than like scrolling down and getting like quick hits of news. And to me, it's also a generational thing. I've noticed with readers, like there's some people who really love their digital news, but there's still like a very large part of the population that relies on print. And I cannot tell you how many times I became aware of this during the pandemic, when I would write stories about what was going on, whether it was death toll, vaccines, the reopening phase of Florida, and 80-year-olds would call me thinking that they couldn't find any information because they were not online, and they would just read the newspaper and they would see my phone number there. So they would just call me and say, "Hey, how do I schedule a vaccine? How do I get this and that?" And I would walk them through. I ended up being sometimes a bit of a, receptionist in a way, right? Like helping them navigate the websites, because they just relied on the paper so much. And was, I think, one of the first times where I realized, like, whoa, when there's an emergency and when there's need, there really is a large population that relies a lot on the newspaper. And they were so grateful that someone just took the time to help them find information, that it just made, I don't know, it just warms your heart in terms of like, whoa, like even if it's something small, like it's making a big impact for someone. And so since the pandemic, I've started noticing that it's important to do daily news. It's important to do investigative news. It's important to do incremental things because people are hungry for information, and it helps them. You don't know who it's going to help. And I think that there's nothing that can replace that. And so I'm still very proud that I work for one of the, best newspapers or daily newspapers in the country. And I don't know, I just don't think anything's ever going to replace that feeling of print.
Give us the philosophy for the Miami Herald in terms of, we need daily stories, but we want you to be able to have the time to do detailed reporting on these investigations. For you entirely, or for those reporters who do similar things as you, what is the just like focus, daily versus, okay, take your time and make sure you get all the facts about this. Walk us through maybe like a day or a week in your life. It's
hard. It's really hard. I mean, it takes a lot of time management, but there is a benefit to I'm a big proponent of beats, right? If you own a beat, you can own the daily, you can own the investigative, you can own the enterprise. And so I've gone into the habit of, when I do a daily, I do a records request. I do an extra layer of reporting that may not be immediate, right? Like if you do a records request, you're not going to get those records in a week. You might get them in a month. But if it's wide enough, you can take a step back. And then that's when you do the enterprise. And that's when you have the tools to be able to pitch to an editor like, hey, can I please have the time? Because time is the most valuable thing we have. We don't have enough staff. So if you give a reporter a week, that means you have one reporter left, right, in the bureau. So it's a big request. And I think editors, have adapted a little bit more in recent years to, I feel like a lot of editors at the Miami Herald have been so not used to, but like we used to be bigger, right? And we could do more with the staff that we had. And I think they've gotten better at, because they know that we are being asked to do online and print and investigative and daily and breaking news. They've gotten better at working with us and balancing our time. Of course, everyone, editors included, would love to always have more time for investigative, but we do have an investigative team. And sometimes it's kind of like, well, we have to focus on this and not that. But my editor, I'm so grateful. His name is Dave Wilson. Shout out if he's here listening. He's really good at giving me time when I need it. And it's, I think, because of that time that I've been able to do really good work at the Herald. And, I'm not oblivious to the fact that we need to do dailies. So I'm trying to be proactive with that too. And sometimes just don't spend that much time on a daily, right? I mean, let the story go and let it be incremental. It doesn't all have to be enterprise. And if you let it go and do a daily and you can work faster, you can spend more time too on enterprise that day.
Speaking of the Miami Herald, and I'm going to be dating myself as I bring this up, but I feel like there's certain traditions and there's certain just the pride that people feel working for a newspaper and what they've done, their history. Whenever I think about the Miami Herald, I think about the 1988 presidential campaign. And I think about Gary Hart, who was the senator from Colorado, who was going to be the Democratic nominee. And he was having an affair, and he famously basically challenged reporters to follow him and prove it. And the Miami Herald did. They had the story, which basically led to his demise. And I know that was an extremely long time ago before you started working there, but I'm wondering about just like the ethos of a newsroom and how that type of thing just transcends the decades about this is what the Miami Herald has done. This is what it means to be a reporter for this newspaper.
Oh, absolutely. There's a pride to it, right? I mean, I work with a Mary Ellen class. She's been a reporter with the Miami Herald for 19 years. And just to hear the stories of almost just not even that long ago, just 10 years ago or whatever. And it's just amazing what the newspaper could do. And I think we still have that hustle. And I think it's a very reporter-driven newspaper. And that has been what has made the Miami Herald so great over the years, that editors have trusted the instincts of people on the ground and with the knowledge to just run with the story. And we always get good stories. I mean, when the Surfside thing happened, when the Champlain Towers collapsed in the middle of the night on Surfside, my colleagues who lived, blocks away went on their bicycles before sunrise, and were there on the ground talking to people and survivors who were telling the gripping stories about what it was like to hear that crack, and then your building is collapsing and you're trying to escape it. And there were investigative stories immediately, right, about what caused the collapse. There were the human stories about the victims. There was everything you can think about that would be required to cover that story. We had it, and including, for example, I had a small role with the bureau here in Tallahassee. What are lawmakers going to be doing about building codes, and what is needed? What could have been done to be better, right? And the newsroom as a whole won the Pulitzer for breaking news, and it was just such a group effort. It was editors too knowing how to coordinate, and it just felt it was a lot of work, and it was a lot of sleepless nights, but it was also, I think, where the Herald just thrives the most, almost under pressure. Everyone knows what to do. And it's such an organic response. And it's out of love, out of necessity, out of just love for the community, and that we owe it to them to be there when there's an emergency, to be able to give them what they need.
So as you're covering state politics for Florida and you're in Tallahassee, these all become national stories. And so I'm going to start with sort of a general question, then see if I can hone in on a more specific element of it. Pretty much anything that Ron DeSantis says becomes a national story, even though this is local. I believe, if I'm incorrect, please let me know, that he was on a book tour, and you basically went around as part of this book tour because this was before he announced that he was running for president, but it was pretty obvious this is what he was doing. So I'm wondering if you can kind of explain what it's like to be covering local stories, but still knowing that these are very much national stories, especially when you have, Ron DeSantis, who had and now still has very high presidential national aspirations.
Yeah, and it's been like that for about 2 years now. We've known that he was toying with the idea and flirting with a presidential run for a while now, even though he always said, no, I'm just focused on the job at hand here. It's well, you're traveling in Israel and you're going to Japan. We can see the signs, you're fundraising in California. So it has been a lot of work in terms of, because DeSantis is also, the governor Ron DeSantis is known for, at least before he was running for president, it was a fire hose of news. So you had to, because again, we have 2 reporters from the Miami Herald in Tallahassee and 2 reporters from the Tampa Bay Times, and we have a shared bureau. So in reality, we're just 4 reporters covering state government, state agencies, the governor who's potentially running for president, and everything all at once in the aftermath of the pandemic, all while he's toying with the presidential run. And so it's a lot of work for 4 people, and especially when there's national implications. And it's been a need to know what to pick and choose and what is worth covering, what is not. everything with my beat has been pretty much national news. It had to do with the masking of children in schools, the return to school, the battle against the Republicans going after critical race theory and gender ideology, or any issue related to how we teach racism in schools. It's just been a lot, and everything was national. So there's a lot of pressure as well as to, you can't get anything wrong, because you get something wrong and it's amplified times 100. So there has been, a more focused approach to reporting and knowing what do we want to prioritize, what stories do we want to tell, and how do we tell them in the most responsible and most accurate way, because people are going to be watching us. And then obviously, that when we know it's going to be a national topic, comparing other states, right? It's always more work, because you know that it's going to be a national story. So you need to know at least, how do we compare to what others are doing, and always having that context, and always being prepared to go the extra length, to not just be, hey, we're a local newspaper. No, like, if we're going to own the story, we better own the story, and we better have all the context we need.
My next question is related to that. And that is, especially when it's this fire hose of information, it would be really easy to spend all day just on Twitter and just putting out a whole bunch of tweets about whatever Ron DeSantis says, or whatever other different legislatures in Tallahassee say. What is your philosophy, or the Miami Herald's philosophy, in terms of putting something out on Twitter, but also saving something for the print edition, for the online edition? Ultimately, you're looking for subscribers. You're looking for people to pay for their digital subscriptions. How do you balance getting news out there, especially when you know it's national news, with, no, I want to focus on the reporting and save it for the actual story?
I think it just depends, right? Like how urgent the news is. I am pretty active on Twitter, but I used to be more. And I found that it was more so than, like, I don't know, sometimes or X now, and not Twitter. X tends to be sometimes a bit of an echo chamber. It's really good to find people who are, when you need a comment, or just like monitoring it for news. But like, if you're there all day, like, you're not spending enough time calling people and finding out what's actually really happening. So I'm always active on Twitter, but I don't or X, but I don't rely on it so much for me putting out the news and being like so dependent on, like, oh my gosh, I haven't posted on X in an hour, I have to do that. So I'm mostly just worked on, like, if I'm doing an Excel sheet, just doing the reporting and saving it for stories. And when it comes to that, like, we do have a lot of stories behind the paywall for subscribers only. And I think sometimes we do make the call to, if we have a story, let's not tweet it out, because we don't want to tip other reporters to the story. So we still want to be competitive. And so we try to get stories out quickly and put it on the website, and then you tweet it, rather than, having to tweet out the tip and all of a sudden someone beat you because they were a faster writer.
Right. Okay, we'll start to wrap things up here a little bit, but I wanted to give you the opportunity for things I did not ask, just other advice that you would give, whether it's a high school student, a college student right now, someone who's just getting out of college, in terms of what it means to cover state politics, and just your advice for aspiring journalists on what they should be focused on and what they should be prepared for if this is the life that they want to have.
Yeah, I mean, if people are interested in state government and they're just starting, I would just say get involved in city government, right? Because a lot of the state news that we cover trickles up, right? I mean, they're not sometimes they do create laws out of the blue, but a lot of the times it's in response to something that has happened locally. Either because a newspaper reported it, there was an issue, someone died, something collapsed. So if you master the local beat at an early age, you're going to be more prepared than you realize in covering state government. Yes, it's a different system. It's a different approach to how you're going to be sourcing, how you're going to be reporting, the meetings, everything. But at the end of the day, like, it's so local government and local happenings are so important to what happens at the state level. And at the end of the day, people who are interested in reading state news are at our locals, right? And so they want to know how the state laws are impacting them. And so I always try to have a mix of both in my stories. It's sometimes really difficult because I'm not based in Miami, but being able to tell, no one wants to read a story about a bill says this. They want to know, hey, in Miami, X amount of people are relying on X service, and here's what lawmakers are trying to do to help those people, or whatever it is. And so you kind of have to humanize state stories. So if you have a wide network of sources at the local level at the beginning, and then you go on to report on the state government, you're going to be a better storyteller than most. And press corps, I don't know how it is in other states, but they're shrinking. We don't have enough people. And I think it's having people interested in that. It's really important. And just giving it the respect that it needs, and not just seeing it as politics, right? But like respecting the norms, respecting how it is, and never forgetting that, because politics today tends to erode or not pay that much interest to the norms. But if you just keep that in mind and give the context to people, like, this wasn't like this 10 years ago. This wasn't, it's changing. It's just still important for people to know, so they can keep their feet on the ground and not get used to maybe unusualness of our political system nowadays.
Yeah, no, that's really good. I like to write down different, just like phrases that guests have. And some of the ones from you, Ana, was just be curious. I think that's such an important thing. Like, the more curious you are. Also, it's hard. Reporting is hard. Time management. The number of times that you said like spreadsheet or, Excel sheet or, put in a records request, like all of that takes time, and it takes a lot more patience than journalists would like. But I'm super proud of what you're doing, and I'm glad that you're continuing the good fight for newspapers.
Thank you. I love doing it. Hopefully more people want to come in. It's a hard time to be a journalist, right? So it's encouraging to see the younger generation still wanting to go into it. So hopefully they're energized, motivated, and ready to work.
That's right. All right, let's brag about some people who are also San Diego State alums who are making us proud. I know you're ready with your list, so brag away about all the proud Aztecs out there.
Well, I really wanted to highlight two specifically. Madison Hopkins. She was, when I was managing editor and I graduated, she followed me into that position. And now, I don't know if she's still there, but recently she won a Pulitzer. She worked for the Better Government Association, and she did a huge investigation on some fatal fires in Chicago. And the investigation was about how flaws in the Chicago building code kind of contributed to that. And she won the Pulitzer. And I love her. And shout out Madison if you're listening. And she would be great to follow if anyone's interested in more investigative journalism. And then and maybe I'm biased, but he's my good friend too. And it's Arturo Garcia Sierra. He's a marketing and communications manager at the Museum of Contemporary Art in San Diego. And it has gotten it's a huge museum, and he's doing great stuff there too. And he's more on the creative side, right? With promoting the museum and exhibitions. And I just love what he does. And yeah, those are two people that I'm thinking of.
Yes, I'm glad that you did. So for my alum that I want to brag about, it's a very much national profile. His name is Armen Keteyian. He is a best-selling author, journalist, executive producer. He's won 11 Emmys. I mostly know him because I see him on TV on NFL Sundays. He's a sideline reporter. He's done so much more than that. He's reported for 60 Minutes and 60 Minutes Sports. He has written multiple best-selling books, including one about Tiger Woods that became an HBO documentary. He has worked nationally as a national correspondent for ABC News for 8 years. He is just the ultimate guy who can do sports, who can do news, who can do documentaries, who can do sideline reporting, where you need to get an injury note out to fantasy football enthusiasts within 8 seconds on the sidelines. He just can do it all. And he is a long-time, very respected national journalist. He went to San Diego State in the early 70s. He still looks like he's about 35 years old. I don't know how he does it, but Armin Katayan, you are the man. And we are so proud of what you are doing in so many different walks of journalistic life.
Oh.
All right, Ana, this was super fun. I'm glad that we were able to connect and learn about your story, your journey. I'm blown away that you lived with your brother when you were 16 years old in the United States, and then the move to Florida. You just never know what's going to happen journalistically and how it's going to take you to Japan and everywhere else. So thank you for sharing your story and your journey with us.
Of course. Thanks for having me. It was so much fun going down memory lane.
Once again, that was Ana Ceballos. I am your host, Josh Sushan. We appreciate you listening every week, and we like to remind alums, get involved with the university. You can mentor students. You can be a guest speaker via Zoom or in person. There's a lot of different ways that you can help the next generation of journalists who will continue to make us proud. So get involved in the university. We will talk to you again next week. This is the Where You At podcast.
Thanks for listening to the Where Ya At podcast. This is Devin Watley from the class of 2021. Thanks to Martine Marine for creating the music you're hearing right now, and Alex Piscatelli for her work on the podcast name and artwork on social media. And a reminder to SDSU alums, we really want to know where you at. Tell us about your career. Get involved in the school. There's many ways you can do this, from donating your time or money, mentoring students, to even speaking in classrooms, in person, or on Zoom. Your work can help us grow the program and create more opportunities for our students to succeed. Again, thanks for listening. Subscribe to this podcast. Tell your friends. Recommend us a future guest. And go Aztecs.